The Hagmann and Hagmann report for today. It's a fabulous Friday edition. Today is January 9th, 2015. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son, fellow investigator, fellow researcher Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann report. Folks, you're about to hear 3 hours of unbiased and uncensored news, information, analysis of the news, propelling the news, what's behind the news. And you are listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and the fog of disinformation, misinformation, to bring you the news behind the news. What's really behind it, what you need to know. We broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on the internet at hagmannandhagmann.com. That's hagmannandhagmann.com. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network via this website. It is the hagmannandhagmannreport.com. That's the audio for the Christians United Broadcasting Network. I want to tip our hats to Troy and the Christians United Broadcasting Network. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Thank you for your belief and for your trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. Now, we're going to be getting into tonight what I believe to be the real focus, or the real objective behind terrorists, the global objective, how this will be exploited to the extent that it will be used against us. And this is part of the Islamization, I suppose that's the only way to put it, the coming Islamization of the West, and specifically America, and why, well, how this all fits together. And it does have with it some pretty interesting aspects that no one is actually talking about. We are guest free this evening. We'll be taking your calls later. It's 661-244-9839. That's 661-244-9839. We take calls by order of wait time. So if you want to just get on now, if you can do that, and press 1, and we'll get to you when we open the phone lines. Before that, they're going to bring Joe on. Joe, welcome to the snowy studios. But by the way, we're socked in, or not really socked in, but we've got about, well, depending on where you're at, anywhere from half a foot to 2 feet to, my goodness, I don't know. It's warmer on Mars, according to the papers in London, than it is here.
I live a few blocks from the lakeshore. You live a few miles from the lakeshore, and I tell you, there is probably at least an 8-inch difference of snow closer to the lakeshore, more so than it is up here, which is unusual. Usually below the lake, a few miles below the lakeshore, is where the snow belt starts. And after I got your van stuck in a snowbank, I stole a township snow plow truck, and made my way up here today. So
see, people are going to think you're serious, obviously, right? But
yeah, I'm not serious.
Right. Somebody had said, "Boy, it's good that you had," and we should address this on air. We do make light of certain things, and I think at some point you referenced having, I think, 17,000 ounces of silver or something like that, or
I don't ever remember saying that, and if I did say it, it was a joke.
Yeah. Or something to that effect.
17,000 ounces.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I was going to say, why don't you share, buddy? But no, it's a lot of times people will not.
I don't even have 170 ounces.
Yeah.
And it's something you don't talk about. Telling other people what you have and don't have, but I'll tell you what I don't have, and that's any type of wealth accumulated in precious metals.
Well, I can tell you that neither one of us have the wealth accumulation, and that's not to say anything other than being realistic, and because we've got the same problems everyone else has. That's the thing that we've got to really, I think we have to stress. We do. On a monthly basis, we look at our bills and we look at the income and we say, okay, what bills do we have to pay? And so I mean, it's not that we're poor, but it's certainly not that we're rich either. But to destroy.
No, we are wealthy to the point that our bills are paid and our necessities are taken care of. We don't have any extravagant habits or fancy cars or clothes or anything like that, anything in the material world. We get by. The Lord provides for us to get by, and to get by means to have what we need to survive. Beyond that, once in a while, to take my wife out to dinner or to a movie, that's the extent of our, and on anniversaries, we like to go out of town for a weekend and get a hotel room for a few nights. That's the extent of our.
Well, usually that's combined with a that's combined with a conference or something to that effect. But by the way, the Orlando Prophecy Summit or the Prophecy Conference in Orlando, Prophecy in the News. I'm going to be putting the banner up here shortly. That's going to take place in March. Hopefully, we'll all see you there. We're going to have the opportunity to speak, and we're also going to have the opportunity to moderate a panel. This time with a little bit more advance notice and things put together. So it's going to be a great time. I'm going to tell you, I've got some questions in my mind, and Joe and I have not talked about this yet, but for Orlando, getting to pick the people out that we're going to talk with, moderate the panel discussion with, I've got some interesting things in my mind that if we can pull this off, will really be a very, I don't want to say explosive, but extremely knowledge-driven. Yeah, informative.
Meaningful, purposeful, timely.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you for all that. Yeah. Anyway, so looking forward to that. If you haven't made your reservations, please do so. And also, when you do that, just tell them you heard it on the Hagmann Hagmann Report in the comments section or whatever. That way, they know where this is coming from. Because I got an email this morning about this. It's not for credit, but they're looking for the demographics. They're looking for, where are these people coming from, why, and, where are you coming from, why. It doesn't have to be certainly not to meet us, but just where did you hear about it? They're looking for their best penetration, so they know where, so for the next conference and the following conference after that, if there is one. So hopefully we can play a role in that. But Joe, I
want to open today with a funny story here because for those of you, I don't know if I said anything over the air, I had lost my cell phone for a few days. And with me, I a lot of the guests and some listeners and people that we talk to on a regular basis, I deal with usually via my cell phone, whether it's through text or having conversations. So it's something I do kind of need to stay in touch with people. I do not have all the numbers of my contacts, whether it be guests or whoever, transferred onto a written form, so I have a backup copy. So, it's essential when you lose your cell phone and there's somebody you need to talk to and you don't have their number because it's in your phone and you don't have it written down. That's kind of a pain in the neck. Well, anyway, 2-3 days I couldn't find my cell phone, and we're going through different ways of trying to locate it through apps and through the provider. And it's been real cold here the last few days. So I have this Weather Channel-like jacket that is very warm. It's blue and everything, just like you'd see on the Weather Channel, that protects you from any type of, when you're out in the elements, it'll keep you warm. And I have a leather jacket. And when it got real cold here a few days ago, I started using my Weather Channel jacket because it was 2 degrees with a -20 wind chill. And the leather jacket just doesn't suffice with that. Well, searching for my phone, tearing apart the vehicles, my apartment, to the point where all the sheets come off the mattress gets lifted up, drawers get emptied. It's in my leather coat pocket. Today I found it this afternoon. So
my question would be,
it's on silent. I keep it on silent when the show's on, and I forget so often at night to turn it back on after the show to turn it off silent. So it was on silent, so you couldn't call it and hear it because it would just vibrate. So.
I as a father, I hang my head in shame over the disorganized nature of my son. But under what circumstances would you lose a cell phone under a mattress? I mean, how would that happen? Explain that to me.
I'm just covering all bases. I've found things I've lost in weirder places than that. So, I mean, sometimes, I don't know, if you ever lay in your bed, you ever stick your phone between the box spring and the mattress, or stuck something there? If you're writing, you stick a pen in there so you can grab it and while you're kind of half laying down, half sitting up. Well, I do sometimes, so that was not an unrealistic place for me to search.
Yeah, I'm exacerbated by her. Yeah, I'm just. Oh my goodness! Come on, really? in between the or under the mattress. Yeah, hey, help me lift the mattress up. Let me look for it underneath here. That's the ticket. Yeah, okay. Folks, one of the things, just a couple of housekeeping items I want to get into here. Hopefully, I'm not in the chat. Hopefully, my volume is all right for the people in the chat. All right, good. I'm trying a few different things here. Where hopefully, can we speak frankly here? Hopefully, this will work out for us. What we're trying to do, and what I've been busy doing here. For those of you who have not received email responses, I've been extremely busy during the day. From well before sunup to the show, almost to the show time, doing certain things that hopefully will benefit down the road, including but not limited to studio improvements. Okay. And I'll just leave it at that. Only because the best studio improvements we can make, we have to do them ourselves. That's we're not going to have contractors come in and do things that we can do ourselves. So that's one thing. The other thing is the sound issues. To that extent as well, I'm going to have on SoundCloud. Now we are on SoundCloud. If you click any article on our website, Hagmann.com. On the right-hand side, once you open the article, just click on the headline. It doesn't matter which article. On the right-hand side, you'll see the link to our SoundCloud account. One thing I'm doing right now, I'm in the process of equalizing the audio between Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. Now, I just want people to understand. We have people who call in and say Tom's too low, Steve's too high. Okay, folks, they're calling into a switchboard at BTR. They're not calling into a COMEX here. All right. Now, this is something that we're working on, and the equipment is pretty doggone expensive. Okay, for them to call into here, and then for us to route the audio into BTR. You follow what I'm saying? In other words, they're calling the switchboard at BTR, so we have no control over their audio directly. Now, we can control it via BTR interface. However, it's not the same as the studio. So we can do things to mitigate the differences, but we can't do them well, effectively, at least not during the show. So what I'm doing right now is I'm equalizing the audio on Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. And I'm going to be putting it up on SoundCloud, and I'll be putting a link directly on Hagmann and Hagmann.com. But it takes a while because you got to go through the entire file, and using a program, and you've got to. It just takes a while. It's a labor-intensive practice, and you got to kind of clip out some things and make sure things are right, and watch for the clipping, audio clipping, and stuff. So, be patient. That'll be up, and if perhaps what I'll do as well is I'll take the existing BTR file down. I'm not sure if how to do that and replace it. Joe, you might have to do that with a cleaned up audio, because I think that program that we had Wednesday was just so incredibly informative with Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. My goodness, and hopefully everyone has had the chance to take advantage of the book offers. That's a doggone good book offer. I mean, really, the amount of paper product that you will receive for the money is just incredible. And I was talking to Steve and Tom, and they were both very upfront and saying, look, we're not trying to get rich. We're not selling books here. We're trying to get information in the hands of people. That's our objective. And any author knows that you write a book, even a self-published book, and especially sometimes self-published books, your profit margin is extremely low. So you start talking about 25% off or throwing extra books in there. You break even sometimes with the shipping and all that. So just so you know, if you want to take advantage of that offer, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, SteveQuayle.com, do so. Excuse me. But tonight we've got Paris. Here's the deal with this, and then you can Just go to Drudge, for example, and if you go to Drudge, front page. I mean, what more do you need? Paris war zone, 3 days of terror that gripped France comes to an end. According to the Associated Press, Al-Qaeda Yemen directed attack. Anonymous says it will shut down jihadist websites. Fine, that's good. When we do monitor Arabic language websites, and we see the linguistic differences between somebody, we'll say, in somebody whose native language is in Arabic and someone whose native language is in English, you can tell the Google translates, for example. You can tell, and if you're in there long enough, and if you've been in the various password restricted forums, which that's where the information is at, you can tell who's posting from a Western country, whether it be the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, and you could tell who's inherently, from the Middle East or indigenously from the Middle East, or you can tell. And I'm not going to get into how or the mechanics that we have, but we monitor this pretty closely. And as I mentioned on George Norrie the other night, I don't even know what night it was, 2 nights ago, I think, the attacks in Paris, they were talked about in the 2013 magazine Inspire. Now, we used to publish those magazines, Inspire magazines, on our website when we had HomelandSecurityUS.com, which we still have. It's just inactive. It's just a kind of a data repository at the moment. But we stopped because we found that we were actually facilitating the open, facilitating the dissemination of the information. We had to stop. It wasn't prudent and responsible. And it was interesting to me that we never had any objections by the Department of Justice or by DHS or the CIA or the FBI, and we have had all 3-4 agencies into our offices. I mean, it's we've been in our office when there was a knock on the door, and somebody from the CIA had come in, identifying themselves as being from the CIA, and the conversation was quite interesting, I should add, and we've had that with the FBI and other agencies, and in fact, Tom Bowerly and I and Steve Quayle both at one point had a situation where, for those of you who don't know, Tom Bowerly is the host of WBEN AM 930, a good friend, very popular host in Western New York, Buffalo, Niagara Falls area, Rochester, all through that area. And we did have a situation once where the three of us were the targets of a small but determined group of people out of the New York, Philly, New Jersey area. Okay, so the tri-state area around New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. And we also were the targets of the the man who beheaded his wife at the Buffalo studios, the Buffalo TV studios for the Muslim network there. I guess I mentioned that only because, when Steve talks about the threats and others talk about it, and Tom references them as well, they're real, and they're a little bit disturbing. But the bottom line here is what we're going to be seeing, or what we saw in France, in Paris. And we've seen it to some extent with Boston. But there's differences, of course. There's similarities.
Let's look at the Paris situation.
Go ahead.
What was allegedly the violence was sparked from apparently a cartoonist depicting the Prophet Muhammad in a light that was unsatisfactory or derogatory. I don't know. I haven't seen the cartoons, nor do I care to, nor do I think it's important. This was the excuse of why this attack happened, because the cartoonist was depicting this Muhammad in a derogatory manner. Therefore, he was insulting, Muhammad and Islam. So retaliation needed to be taken in order to, which is, it's from a Christian perspective, from reading the Bible and understanding what the God of the Bible wants, love, harmony with your fellow brothers and sisters, nonviolence, patience in the face of some of the worst conditions. The last thing the God of the Bible ever says to do is, we don't need to worry about taking revenge for his name. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. But in this case, in this belief system, that is not the way they believe. So vengeance was taken by these people personally, allegedly, and brought to Paris, France, where police officers and others were attacked. Now, this was the basic excuse or reason why this happened. Now, there's some problems. If people have viewed the videos that were released with the shooting, there was a video released where the shooter, there was a cop on the ground, and the shooter came up to him and pointed an AK-47 near his head and pulled the trigger and walked away. And it looks like he shot the cop in the head. Well, if you look at the video at closer inspection, you can see when he fires, it brings up some dust off the sidewalk. No blood is seen, no brain matter, nothing to indicate the person was actually shot, which you would see if somebody was shot point-blank range in the head with an AK-47. His head would blow up like a watermelon.
No, that's where I disagree with you. I'm not going to interrupt you, but I want to put a place marker here.
You're the forensic. You know more about the forensics and the way that this would.
It would depend on the point of entry, and I've seen the video that you're talking about. There is some question with respect to I would question the authenticity of the video only to the extent, was it edited, and what was the angle? Look, I've seen gunshots of all types to the head, both in class and outside of class. The blood spatter analysis, of course, I've taken, and one would expect it's not like on television. A lot of it is not like on television, where you take a shot by a AK-47 or AR-15, or it's not. It doesn't happen like that normally. Okay, now it all depends. The point of entry, the angle of entry, it all depends. But my question, the only question I've got with respect to this video, I question the authenticity of the video and whether it was edited. I believe that and also, that you got to take into account the blood pressure of the dead officer or the officer that was writhing on the ground, already having been shot. And also, one of the things that I found very curious was he was a Muslim. Now, this brings up another point. We know that there was pre-planning, surveillance. I believe, anyway, that there was a lot of pre-planning and operational surveillance being conducted at the headquarters. So, might this police officer, and I don't know this, I'm asking this question, and I think this needs to be addressed. Might this police officer had been involved? Even unwittingly, to some extent. If you think about this in the macro sense, this guy's already on the ground. Now, we know these guys are savages. These Muslims are savages, and we're going to get into the groundwork here and explain to you how we believe this is all going to play out and why this is so important. Not for the reasons you believe, not for the reasons you're being told, not at all. You're going to see an opposite effect. There's going to be something totally opposite when this is all said and done. But, getting back to the officer, it all depends, and again, it's not as neat, tidy of a thing. It's not you can get shot in the head and not have it look like a watermelon falling off a building, okay? Just leave it at that. But the forensics of it, and I'm no forensics expert at all. I'm not a forensics expert. I am certified in certain disciplines of forensics, but again, you've got to look at a number of factors, including trajectory, type of bullet used, the angle of impact, and a whole bunch of stuff. well beyond the scope of the program. So, but you're saying, according, and I've seen the video, I understand what you're saying, but you believe perhaps that maybe, what, he didn't get shot in the head? I mean, and if so, then what if?
I have no idea what really happened, but I think that's the whole purpose. I mean, there obviously is multi-layered agendas involved in these, whatever you would call them, incidents, false flags, attacks. But one thing that is for sure, the more often these things start to happen, the more questions are raised rather than answers given, that by governments, that by news, or anybody. It seems from Sandy Hook to the Boston Marathon bombings to Osama bin Laden being killed, whenever we see the government claiming an incident, that something happened and it happened a certain way, there seems to be more holes in the stories than Swiss cheese. And then it seems also that other disinformation is put out to fill in those holes, but it leads down a rabbit trail which is never ending, and is done so to make people so confused, running in circles mentally, that they're missing what is really important and what they really should be focused on. That is, no matter how many of these events are going on, yes, we need to pay attention to it. Yes, we need to try to configure what is happening. At the same time, we can't lose sight or focus of what our main objective and goals are.
Exactly, and thank you for that. Yeah, I look at that video and that whole scene there as anecdotal to what the bigger picture. And as I said, everyone appears to be, and even many in the alternative media appear to be missing the bigger picture. At least that's my belief. And let me just say this: Islam, the threat of Islam, is absolutely 100% real. Okay, this is nothing to be argued about, at least in my view. All right, Islam. Now listen carefully to what I'm saying here, because the last broadcast on WBEN, boy, I'll tell you what, did I ever have, and these programs broadcasts are being monitored by various Islamic groups. It doesn't put any fear into my heart, but I just would like to be quoted correctly, and also my name spelled correctly when I'm quoted. But anyway, Islam is being used as a tool of the globalists right now. All right. The listeners, you know about Albert Pike, and some will question the authenticity of his letters to the 3 world wars. But if you look beyond that, you will see you can authenticate. You can authenticate a lot of this. Go ahead.
I have a sound clip from Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough and his daughter Mika.
Good place to put it, by the way.
And it's titled "So-Called Satire Was Appalling and Directed at the Prophet Himself." And he talks about how we need to make sure that we are not lining ourselves up to be Islam's number one enemy. They talk about this being blasphemy. If you want me to play this clip now, we can.
Yes, please.
It is a interesting clip, and the message, I'll listen closely again here, because whatever they were trying to really say was lost when I listened to it the first time, but here it is.
But Jeffrey Goldberg has written in The Atlantic that the Charlie Hebdo massacre seems to be the most direct attack on Western ideals by jihadists. Yet, I've seen arguments advancing the idea that 9/11 represents the purest expression of Islamic rage at a specific Western idea, capitalism in that case. But satire and the right to blaspheme are directly responsible for modernity. It does seem that there is right now a clash of two civilizations that are being played out here.
You're quite right, but I think we also have to take a look more closely at the nature of the so-called satire. I have not seen what I'm about to say, but I've been told by some people that some of the cartoons were absolutely appallingly vulgar and directed at the Prophet himself. Now, is that really humor, or is that an insult designed to provoke? Secondly, in the last 3 minutes, at least on 3 occasions, some of you referred again to jihadist groups, jihadist terror, and so forth. Jihad means holy war. We are advertising them and reinforcing them in their beliefs when we talk like that. The real Muslims are not waging a holy war against us, at least not yet. But the objective of the fanatics is to turn the entire Muslim world against us. And we have to be clever and try to avoid that while opposing these extremists, these fanatics, who do not, as of now, even come close to representing the world of Islam.
Do you fear as...
Joe, can I...
Sure, jump in, Jeffrey.
All right.
Apparently that's the end of the clip. It was just 2 minutes longer, but I guess I cut it off there.
Okay. Well, all right.
And there's a few things in there we heard that really made my eyebrows rise. That is, one, Brzezinski saying that this was an appalling insult to the prophet. Joe Scarborough called it blasphemy. It almost sounded like if you make fun of holy prophet, what do you expect to happen?
Yeah, you've got to pay very careful attention to the words they use, Joe. Go ahead. But yeah, the words that they used, okay, thanks, were extremely important and are extremely important, especially Brzezinski. We know him to be the globalist extraordinaire. His daughter on Morning Joe, of course, the former representative with the dead intern, Joe Scarborough. Don't forget that, folks, okay? Just don't forget that. Joe Scarborough, dead intern. Okay. But anyway, Mika Brzezinski, Morning Joe, and then you've got Zygmunt Brzezinski. Zygmunt Brzezinski has got an interesting past, particularly with the creation of Islam, or not the creation, the facilitation of the spreading of Islam in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and in certain administrations from Carter onward. Well, really from Nixon onward, but really effective in terms of manipulating Carter. But having said all of that, now keep in mind what Brzezinski said, and I just want to establish a few points here about Islam. To me, based on everything that we've read and we've seen professionally and otherwise, Islam is not a religion, it is a cult, by definition. You will find agreement on this, I believe, with me, if you listen to a lot of religious or theological scholars on various religions. Now, having said all of that, what has taken place in Paris, what took place in Sydney, don't forget about that. Americans have a very short attention span. What has taken place in other parts of the world, and obviously it's already come to America in the form of 9/11 and the Boston bombings, and you might say, well, the Boston bombings, that was a false flag. Well, you can have a false flag that has components of which are real. That's what makes a false flag so insidious. But what is taking place here is this particular, and again, by definition, cult of Islam is invading the United States, has invaded the United States, and has infiltrated our governments at the highest levels. Now, the forces of Muhammad, we'll call them that, they've arrived here in the United States, and the battle for the heart and soul of America and Canada, and really all of the West, is in progress. We have in our midst a very large army of Islamic terrorists, Muslim activists, working very hard at their goal, which is nothing less than converting Americans to Islam and turning America into an Islamic state. Now you might think, well, wait, that's not the bigger picture. No, it's not. But it's a component of the bigger picture. You do have these Muslim terrorists, undoubtedly Muslim terrorists, who are working toward that goal, but they're also being managed. Their activities are being managed. Over the last, we'll say, generation, the United States has welcomed the immigration of Muslims, with those having benign or at least overtly benign intentions as well as malignant intentions against us. We've got a historic naivete that dictates that we open our doors to anybody, even if they don't knock. The majority of Americans, the Westerners, are clueless to their hidden agendas. This Islamic invasion is absolutely unlike those of the early stages of Islam when they conquered most of the world with the sword, by violence. If you go back in history, and folks, I would urge everyone to understand history, because where we are today is a product of our past, even the Middle Ages. Currently, Islamic activists, or Muslims themselves, are much too clever to attempt taking over America militarily. They realize, of course, that the only way to conquer us is from within. Now, Joe, do me a favor. Go ahead and play that clip one more time, please, if you could, the Brzezinski clip. And folks, again, pay attention. Listen to this. Zygmunt Brzezinski.
But Jeffrey Goldberg has written in The Atlantic that the Charlie Hebdo massacre seems to be the direct attack on Western ideals by jihadists. Yet, I've seen arguments advancing the idea that 9/11 represents the purest expression of Islamic rage at a specific Western idea, capitalism in that case. But satire and the right to blaspheme are directly responsible for modernity. It does seem that there is right now a clash of two civilizations that are being played out here.
You're quite right, but I think we also have to take a look more closely at the nature of the so-called satire. I have not seen what I'm about to say, but I've been told by some people that some of the cartoons were absolutely appallingly vulgar and directed at the Prophet himself. Now, is that really humor, or is that an insult designed to provoke? Secondly, in the last 3 minutes, at least on 3 occasions, some of you referred again to jihadist groups, jihadist terror, and so forth.
Assalamu alaikum.
I want to share one or two things my wife picked up in her work. 2006, 2 years before the 2008 victory of Obama, the Saudis were saying, we will have a Muslim president in the White House in 2008. And my wife fell off her chair. So these Saudis are completely crazy. I mean, nobody knew who Obama was because he was just elected a few months before in the Senate, and he really wasn't known for anything, and all of a sudden he becomes the president. This was engineered. My wife picked up a broadcast where Obama swore to the Egyptian foreign minister in Egypt in 2009 that he was a Muslim, that his father from Kenya was a Muslim, which makes him a Muslim, that his stepfather Soetoro in Indonesia was a Muslim, that he was raised in a mosque and in a madrasa till age 11 as a Muslim, which makes him a Muslim, and that he had Obamacare and economic problems that they had to deal with first, but after he took care of those things, he would show the Islamic world what he was going to do to Israel, meaning destroy Israel. Now, the 3 things that Obama, the 3 commands that he has to fulfill for the King of Saudi Arabia is, number 1, destroy the Shiite regime in Iran, and replace it with a UN regime, UN-backed regime, which will be pro-Saudi. Secondly, destroy Israel. Thirdly, destroy Christian America, make it Muslim.
We are no longer a Christian nation. Let there be no doubt. Islam is a part of America. Assalamu alaikum.
All right. The first clip that we played for the second time this hour was Zygmunt Brzezinski on Mika Brzezinski's Morning Joe Scarborough, dead intern Joe Scarborough. Now, that was the first clip. The second clip, of course, was Avi Lipkin when he appeared on our program, and we'll have him back on again, bookended by audio segments of Barack Hussein Obama, otherwise known as Barry Soetoro. Now, a couple of things. The reason we played those back-to-back, I understand Brzezinski's role as it was played from the Nixon White House through the present. And you also have to understand how Obama is allowed to be in the White House right now it's far beyond the Muslim thing. It's far beyond the voting blocks. There's a bigger picture at play here that we've seen. In fact, we've already seen much of it play out right in front of our faces, with the spire rising to crown the Freedom Tower at Ground Zero in New York. We've already seen this, and we've already seen the destruction of the World Trade Center, the two Herculean pillars that could also represent two strands of human DNA merging into one strand of DNA. Now you might think, where in the world did that come from? What did he just have a mini stroke on air talking about this, redirecting the conversation? No. This is all part of the bigger picture, I believe. If we look closely enough, we can find the events of 9/11, 2001 were carefully orchestrated by the globalists, by Brzezinski, in the background. Now, I'm not saying that he was at the controls, but you've got an agenda, and the agenda, you've got to understand the bigger picture and the agenda at play. This is all part of it. Islam is a component, a critical component of this agenda. The reason Islam is a critical component is because, number one, of the petrodollar, the existence of the petrodollar and the way the petrodollar is tied up into the Middle East, including but not limited to Saudi Arabia, and of course the creation of Aramco with Saudi Arabia way back in the early or the mid 20th century, early 20th century, and how the CIA basically created a country based on the oil production and created Saudi Arabia through one family. Okay, so this is a very broad subject, but getting back to ground zero, or getting back to the Paris attacks and how all of this fits in America, as we're seeing, America being a target that is really a target that needs to be destroyed or remade, taken down and then remade, just as the Twin Towers were taken down and remade. This is what we're looking at. This is the process. We're seeing these incremental processes take place. Obviously, a military assault on the United States by the Muslims would prove fruitless, so they have attempted to and are capturing our country from within. That's why we are a captured operation. And as I mentioned before on previous programs, and you can find this anywhere you look, the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration of the Obama regime, where you've got 6 American Islamic terrorist sympathizers via the Muslim Brotherhood operatives, they're influencing domestic and U.S. policy. This through Obama. Barack Hussein Obama, who I would suggest at the very least is or was a Muslim himself, or adhered to many of the precepts of the Islamic or the Muslim religion. Now, we'll put that aside for a moment. Most people around, if you talk to most people today, they're oblivious to the fact that really we have been invaded and captured by this Islamic creation. And they're also oblivious to the significant progress being made by this invasion. The arsenal being used by these people, by the Muslims, by these terrorist sympathizers, the arsenal consists of really a broad diversity of weapons. But if you look at it tragically, and isn't this the most important thing, the most strategic weapons that they possess are the ones that we as a country, we as a nation, we as a government, we as a people have handed to them. Really, the weapons that they are using the most are our democratic laws and our tolerance for all religions. You see, this country, America, does not have a problem with intolerance. Not at all. America has a problem with tolerance. Let me just say that again. There is no problem of intolerance in America. We have a tolerance problem. If anything, we're too tolerant. We are too tolerant with the Islamic agenda. We are too tolerant by letting people just sully and take down the name of our Lord and Savior. We are too tolerant with the legalistic approach to marriage. We are too tolerant with the redefining of marriage. We have to become more intolerant. And people, I know that sounds ridiculous, but we must become less tolerant. What, you don't agree with me?
Well, I agree with you to a certain extent. When it comes to our personal lives and our personal relationship with the Lord, yes, we cannot tolerate certain things to be allowed to be crept in and to interfere into, like we talked about the other day, about the Constitution versus the Ten Commandments. When we see the Constitution is being changed and the laws are going contrary to what the Lord's laws are, we know we cannot partake in or be a part of any kind of laws that go against what the Lord's law is, correct?
Like abortion.
Correct.
Okay. Like homosexuality.
I believe yes, we cannot be tolerant of allowing those things to be creeping in and become a part of the church and the accepted behaviors and practices of the church. Absolutely not. At the same time, on the level of tolerance for different religions, we live in a society that was created to be what we see today. It was created, and we talked about this, the different governments, from a monarchy to a dictatorship to whatever it is. We know that the Commonwealth or a republic falls the hardest. Why does that happen? Because it grants the most freedoms to the citizens being human and human nature being what it is.
No, it's
eventually erodes down to the
right
to the perverse level, to the worst case scenario that we never imagined we would see. But unfortunately, the Constitution allows for such.
Okay, so let's talk about this right here, because this is where I touched on this on the interview with WBEN, and I just want to reaffirm this with people, with listeners, because sometimes even the most well-intentioned will have a problem with this. People will often cite the First Amendment. You're going to be hearing more and more about the First Amendment as the dissection of the Paris attacks is made in the American press and the Western press. But here's the deal. It's my belief, folks, that one of the most insidiously perverse yet most effective weapons being used in the war against Christians and Christianity in this country is supposedly derived from our nation's founding document, which is the U.S. Constitution. Now, it's likely, and I'm sure you've heard people speak with authority or write with authority about the separation of church and state or the wall of separation. Have you not heard this? Maybe at the dinner table with discussion with friends, family members, even your ministers, priests, pastors. You've heard claims that the U.S. Constitution calls for the separation of church and state. Now, forgive me for those who know all about this. We have a diverse audience growing, and people haven't heard about this. Now, those people who cite such a mandated separation of church and state usually cite the First Amendment to reinforce their claims. The fact of the matter, it's just not true. That's not true. In many cases, you might be talking with people who mean well, but are absolutely clueless about our national history. In other cases, you're going to find that the misconception is no misconception at all, but a deliberate deception. It's important to understand that you're hearing or reading or seeing a lie, at times deliberate, for there is nothing at all in the Constitution or Bill of Rights that mandates any doctrine of separation of church and state. Go to the First Amendment.
Not at all. There isn't. I have a humongous book on this I bought at a secondhand bookstore when we were in Buffalo, I believe. I don't have it with me, but it is called Church and State. It's about a 700-page book.
Exactly.
And it goes through all the historical examples. And you know what's not in there as a historical example? Is the Constitution, is the law.
Right. Well, the First Amendment reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech or the press, or the right of people peaceably, or to of the people peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, the founders, the writers of our Constitution, the founders of this nation as it stands today as a constitutional republic, they consider religious freedom, or the freedom to practice one's faith without fear or interference by the government, to be of the most extreme and critical importance, I believe, to our welfare and to the welfare of our country. So they very carefully structured the First Amendment to include two separately distinct parts or clauses, both of equal importance. Now, the first part, it's often referred to, and is accurately so, of the First Amendment is the Establishment Clause. The second part is the Free Exercise Clause. So when you are having a discussion, ladies and gentlemen, you can be well armed with this. Understand the First Amendment. Two parts. Part one, the Establishment Clause. Part two, the Free Exercise Clause.
Well, let me ask this.
Yeah.
In the world we live in this lawless leadership that we have, whether it's Congress or the executive branch, is from the War Powers Act still being, we're still under the War Powers Act, we're still under, the Patriot Act, where basically the Constitution, the law of land, has been suspended, and we are under an emergency type law, where this Constitution that we have been given does not apply.
Well, you cannot. I understand that. I understand all of that.
From what they say.
From what
they believe, that the Constitution doesn't apply. But, I mean, if we go by their rules in the Constitution, it dictates that, they cannot usurp the power of the Constitution through emergency means or other means in order to deprive the rights of the people. So if we were to go to court, the people who have are using the Constitution as their main piece of evidence would have to be, minus corrupt judges and legal system, which is what we do have, would be found right, would be found correct, and the government today and how they operate would be found illegal. Unfortunately, the law enforcement system, from certain police officers to the hierarchy of leadership in law enforcement to the judges, are all part of this problem as well.
Right. But knowledge is power. At
right.
least the possession and use of knowledge grants you power. So we have to go back to the beginning and understand where everything kind of went awry. And so having this knowledge is important. And again, folks, please be patient with me, with us, as we just finish up the First Amendment before the top of the hour. So let's look at the First Amendment very quickly. The Establishment Clause was very carefully crafted. Why? Well, it was to prevent the federal government from establishing a national religion. Now think about that for a second. It was crafted to prevent the federal government from establishing a national religion or a dominant religion that would cause Christians or followers of any faith to be subjugated to a national religion. Is that what you've heard? Now, these are my words, okay? This I'm not quoting from any book or website. These are my words. So as it was made clear through the writings of the framers following the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Establishment Clause was never intended to be a tool to prevent Christians from openly practicing their faith in any public venue. Please think about those words. And it was never intended to prevent the display of a nativity scene or the Ten Commandments somewhere or a religious symbol or sign on public property. Rather, and this is important, it was written for the purpose of stating what the federal government is prohibited from doing. Think of the words from George Washington. Consider these words. if I could entertain, and I'm quoting now, if I could entertain the slightest apprehension that the Constitution framed in the convention where I had the honor to preside might possibly endanger the religious rights of any ecclesiastical society, certainly I would never have placed my signature to it. Now, Washington was not alone in his thinking. James Madison, the primary architect of the Constitution, on July 12, 1788, in a speech to the Virginia Convention stated, "There is not a shadow of a right in the federal government to intermeddle with religion." Now, despite the careful wording and the obvious intent of the framers of the Constitution, anti-Christian activists have perverted, and intentionally perverted, I might add, and they're using convoluted interpretations of our Constitution against us. And the perversion of the Establishment Clause appeared to really start under the presidential administration of one of the biggest progressives of the 20th century, the biggest liberals, the biggest really Marxist-loving presidents ever, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was after the Second World War when the Supreme Court started to depart from the Christian heritage that was built within America as established by our founding fathers and by the Puritans and Pilgrims, with his socialist interpretations of freedom of religion. Notice I said freedom of religion. He began to institute, under his administration, they really began instituting pagan ideology, usurping legislative powers to which they were not entitled, he was not entitled, and this was in order to bring about the socialist changes desired by FDR himself. And it was during that time, and after that time, that the judicial activism of the court system began. The courts began to subvert the meaning and intent of the Constitution. How? Because the FDR inserted his people, his people of Marxist and atheistic ideology into the courts, whether it was the Supreme Court or federal courts. That was the takeover of the federal court system. So, in addition to this judicial activism, there was one other significant legislative move to gag churches, and we're seeing it today, and gag church leaders from speaking out on issues of homosexuality, morality, anything moral or faith. 1954, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Democrat from Texas. He was running for re-election as a senator in Texas. It was a hot race, man. He was facing aggressive opposition from politically conservative, anti-communist, and non-profit Christian groups. I mean, they were on his butt. This was right around the time, and shortly thereafter, when Senator Joseph McCarthy was actively involved in ferreting out communist infiltration within our government. And you've heard me state many times, and I'll state it again, McCarthy was absolutely correct in his findings. Now, McCarthy was also close to American industrialist H.L. Hunt. He was the founder of a multi-billion-dollar oil business. No surprise there, right? Everybody seems to have one of them in their back pocket. Now, Hunt, at the time, and think about it as this would apply to today, whether it be Alex Jones or Doug and Joe Hagmann or Rick Wiles or, insert name here. Hunt had his own radio program where he promoted his conservative political views, for which he was best known during the 50s, early 50s especially. Between 1951 and 56, Hunt founded and personally funded his own foundation known as Facts Forum, the umbrella company that produced conservative radio and TV programs. Now, using those media venues, what he did, Hunt broadcast news and commentary of a conservative, anti-communist nature. This is back in the early 50s now. Concurrent with his broadcast initiative, his foundation, they distributed books, pamphlets, maybe even logos and bumper stickers, huh? Well, anyway, other material written by many conservative political figures, including then Senator McCarthy. So you had this alliance between McCarthy and H.L. Hunt. Now, it was partially due, and this is based on my research and the research of others, but it was partially due to the long reach, I believe, of Hunt and his promotion of a conservative ideology, especially among Christian churches, that LBJ was really politically on the ropes and about ready to take a dive. Now, picture in your mind, folks, LBJ. So to muzzle, or to mitigate any dissent, to stifle this dissent, what Johnson did was he introduced an amendment that broadened the reach of the IRS. Wow. Wait, history is repeating itself today, is it not? But let's stick with Johnson real quick here. Got about a minute left. What Johnson did, he broadened the reach of the IRS so the IRS can get into our nation's churches, preventing them from speaking out on political candidates and related matters. The Johnson Amendment was codified, depending on which part of the country you're coming from, as 26 U.S.C., ready for this, 501c3. That's right, that's 501c3. That amendment, the Johnson Amendment, was passed unanimously without any debate. Now think about that against the backdrop of what we're seeing take place today. Have we not seen the IRS being used as a weapon to stifle and silence political opposition against the administration or against any political opposition against Obama? Sure. Have we not seen allegations of Obama and affirmations, essentially, of Obama using IRS to delay the issuance of tax-exempt applications, especially for those groups who stand firmly in the Christian conservative pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment camps, anti-abortion, anti-homosexuality? This is just one reason, folks, why having a firm knowledge and understanding of history is so important, because it provides us with insight into the tactics of tyranny. So, since the days of LBJ and since that time, this judicial activism at the federal level has not only reinforced the so-called unconstitutional wall of separation, it served to build it higher. The media has been compromised and promotes this falsehood. Talk show hosts of other ilk do the same. Political leaders cite this. And they've got no clue of what, well, maybe they do. Maybe it's done on purpose.
I believe it is, for the most part.
And I'm just going to close this out here. Look, we have the ability to fight back. You and I, the American citizen, the Canadian citizen, the British citizen, wherever you're listening to this program, we've got the ability to fight back. Dr. Coleman, John Coleman, he wrote a book, What You Should Know About the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. Grab that if you can and read that. The United States Congress can overturn any ruling by the Supreme Court by a simple majority. Did you know that? Roe v. Wade? Whatever. The United States Congress can overturn any ruling by the Supreme Court by a simple majority. Well, you know what we need to do? We need to take the battle to reclaim our religious freedoms to Congress. But in the meantime, and I know that that's a temporary solution, because look, I get that. But what are you going to do? Watch TV instead? You're gonna play, what is it now? Atari?
Watch TV and drink a lot.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Trying to find a doctor to give you pharmaceuticals and numb your brains and senses and thoughts, so you can be oblivious to the world.
Well, I'm just going to end it by this. Look, modern-day intellectuals who want you to believe that the so-called wall of separation, or the much-used phrase of separation of church and state, is rooted somewhere in the U.S. Constitution. It ain't. It's not. They're lying to you. They're either being deliberately they're either lying to you directly, or they're ignorant. Folks, You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report. That on the other side now, getting into the tactics of what we saw in Paris, coming to the United States, already here, and what the larger objective is against the wall of the globalists. Also taking your calls later in the show, 661-244-9839. Thank you. And I want to thank you for tuning in.
Ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 of this Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, this January 9th, 2015. I want to hit this quick headline and throw it back to my dad where he wants to finish what we were talking about in the first hour. Is this a sign of things that come in America as the economy gets worse? Venezuelans throng grocery stores under military protection. Shoppers thronged grocery stores across Venezuela today as deepening shortages led the government to put Venezuela's food distribution under military protection. Long lines stretching for blocks formed outside grocery stores in South America's country's capital as residents search for scarce basic items such as detergent and chicken. And it goes on from there.
If you want to know what's going to happen in America, I believe, at least from my point of view, with respect to the economy, look toward Venezuela currently. If you want to know what's going to happen, take place in America in the near term with respect to the management of terrorism, look to Paris, look to Sydney, look to Boston, and even look further back to 9/11. Because it's needed in this country to fulfill a goal, not necessarily just for World War III, but to fulfill an even larger goal. All right. By the way, I'm going to give a shout out to Katie from Family Essential Oils. Just want to say, folks, if you want, and I've had numerous people email me, so if you're listening to this broadcast tonight, asking about, well, where do we find these essential oils? You can go to our website, HagmannandHagmann.com. On the right-hand side, scroll all the way down. Right above the Prepare for Persecution book by Maria Canise is a banner for essential oils, where we shop for essential oils. That's FamilyEssentialsShop.com. It just says essential oils. Click on that, and that'll take you to the home of Katie. And don't be afraid. Send her an email and with your questions. And Katie is really an expert in essential oils. I just want to say hello there, and also that addresses the emails I've gotten as well. But getting back to America here and the Islamic invasion, it's already taken place. It's already happening. This is part of the reason, one of the reasons why the southern border has remained open. This is why we are importing wholesale numbers of Muslims into this country. We are creating refugees over in Syria. We've created refugees in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we're bringing these refugees here into this country. And many of them are they're not Christian. They're Muslims, and they also have a very specific agenda. But keep that in the back of your mind. And folks, think about this. Those of us old enough to remember life before 9/11, life before the 1993 World Trade Center attack. How many times did we really hear about the sensitivity toward Muslims here in this country that we have to watch? Sure, Salman Rushdie, obviously. Remember that incident where Salman Rushdie had written the satanic verses, and of course Khomeini had put a price on his head. And of course we did see the 1979 takeover of the embassy in Tehran. However, that's not what it appeared to be. That takeover was not, it didn't, the true story is different from the narrative, and one of these days we'll get into that with a little bit more authority when we have more time. But, until 9/11, there was really few Americans questioning the nature of Islam. Since 9/11, we became aware that a second wave, I should say, or perhaps even a first and second wave of terrorists, of these Islamic warriors, have been able to come into our country and are being used to fulfill the agenda of a new world order. Now, I would just want to refer to, and you've heard this quote before, I'm going to refer to a quote that well, a quote that addresses the fulfillment or the process of fulfilling a strategy that an Islamic cleric cited to the Archbishop of Izmir. And the quote is this: "Thanks to your democratic laws, we will invade you. Thanks to our religious laws, we will dominate you." Now, the latter, well, really, look, what's taking place here, the majority of Americans fail to see the bigger picture. They will look at the Muslims, at Muslim terrorists, and say, they're the problem. They're the problem. We need to get rid of, we need to get rid of the Muslim terrorists. Well, yes, we get that. We understand that. It's evident. But few Americans, the majority of Americans, they don't get the bigger picture. And it even transcends World War III. It goes beyond World War III. The bigger picture here is exploiting events like Paris, like Sydney, like Boston, like 9/11 especially, to stifle any debate over any religion. Think about that for a moment, okay? You might think, well, oh man, the Paris attacks, hundreds of thousands came out in protest, against the attacks and for the freedom of speech and the press to publish these cartoons. Think about what Brzezinski said against the backdrop of the 100,000 or so Parisian protesters against the attacks. Now, Joe, you can feel free to come in at any time with that. Can you see how the Western mindset now, through the plans of Brzezinski and the globalists, are going to be using these attacks to say, well, we will by offering the freedom of speech, or by paying lip service to freedom of speech, but by exploiting these attacks and future attacks into a realm where no critical debate, there will be no discussion, intellectual or otherwise, about anything, quote, religious, end quote. They are not only owning the narrative, but owning the airwaves. They will be owning the airwaves and the books and television and all media, all forms of media, to prohibit any discussion, any debate, more importantly, any attempts to, well, bring others to salvation by using the terrorist attacks as an excuse, and particularly against the cartoons, the Muhammad cartoons. If you think back to what Obama said, his statement about there's no room for, there's no place in America for any type of, Joe, I can't remember his exact statement here, and I don't have it in my notes, but something about there's no future, or America has no place in slandering the name of the Prophet Muhammad. Did you recall that? Anyway, yeah.
Yes and no. I mean, there's been so much said by him pertaining to the Islam, from Bo Bergdahl and his father to that whole scenario to other weird oddities and instances we've seen of him seemingly being a part of or stating his allegiance to the Muslim religion.
Which is his religion, I believe. Well, here's the scenario. Here's how this whole thing is working. There's also discussion today and yesterday and the day before. Anytime these events happen, well, why are the moderates, so-called moderate Muslims, they're quiet, or relatively quiet, save for a few comments here and there. If you watched the head of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, come out and condemn these attacks, he did so in such a manner to include Christians in there as well. He said we can't have Christians these Christian terrorists either. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but come on. But here's how it works: you've got terrorists who commit acts of terrorism, as we saw in Paris. The very second that the investigators begin, or an investigation begins, let's say they follow a trail to a mosque or an Islamic center, that moment, these moderates, or those who are identified as moderates, well, they will levy the charge of religious or racial discrimination or bigotry. You're an Islamophobe. Hey, we cannot facilitate Islamophobia. I think Ibrahim from CARE referenced that in his statement about Paris. Well, no one wants to be labeled an Islamophobe, a word recently created, or a bigot, or some sort of person intolerant. I mean, no one wants to be painted as a bigot, as a religious bigot. Ultimately, the investigative efforts are thwarted by these accusations, and the door is open for more terrorists to come in without, unchecked. The success of the real battlefield right now, the battle is being waged, is at these so-called moderates. They are manipulating the system that enables them to be perceived as a valuable section of our society. And we see this being reaffirmed by the renegade-in-chief, Obama himself. This multiplies their potential to have an ever-increasing influence over the government of the United States. We see this through the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrates into our power structure. We see this with Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin. We see this all over with the CIA director, John O. Brennan, who I contend is a Muslim. Few Americans understand that Islam inherently demands what is called a sacral government. This is really speech or the type of vernacular for a church-state form of rule. Do you understand that? You see, that's what Muslims are after, a church-state form of rule. Why we don't hear a lot of criticism is because true Muslims don't consider a Muslim who voices complaints against other Muslims to be a true believer. You can't do that. That's why there's been just a void in public Muslim protests about the Islamic terrorist crimes we've seen over the last decade plus. So you've got to understand the smaller scale, which I just described, and also the politically correct or the captured mainstream, Illuminati-controlled mainstream mass media, politically correct news media, and together with the Muslim activists, the spokespeople, they've conditioned America, they've conditioned the West, they've conditioned every person out there who listens to any news with perceptions that are completely inaccurate about Islam and about the doctrine of Islam. And let me just digress a little bit here. If you have not, and I have to pull this up here real quick, if you have not seen this recently, you want to talk about tolerance, you want to talk about a situation that is absolutely, it's just mind-boggling to me. There was a situation that took place in Canada, and I don't know how many people are aware of this. Let me just bring this up here. Okay, here. Okay. How many people have heard of Eric Brazeau? Okay, by a raise of hands, apparently not too many. Okay, here's...
Not me.
Not you? All right. Here's a guy who, now listen carefully because this is incredible. Here's a guy who received 18 months in jail for insulting Islam on a subway in Toronto.
I did hear about this. Was this in the news yesterday?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's been on the news. Now some will say, well, no, he caused a disturbance, and no. The bottom line here is this man was jailed for speaking his mind about Islam on a Toronto subway. 50 years old, Eric Brazeau, convicted. He's a convicted hate monger. Last July, with two acquaintances, he decided to conduct this social experiment on the Toronto subway. At the time, don't forget, the situation in Gaza was deteriorating. There were heated protests for and against Israel. Now, his idea was supposedly to provoke debate among the riders of the subway. So what he did was he boarded the train with a friend, all decked out in Israeli colors and carrying an Israeli flag, and another who was to video the proceedings while Brazeau began to loudly denounce Islam and the Quran. Well, one of the passengers, a well-known liberal kook anyway, pressed the emergency alarm, causing the train to stop at the next station, ultimately with Brazeau refusing to leave the car. It caused a delay of a half hour, and the bottom line was this guy was taken out. He was denied bail. He was put in custody on July 29th. He was brought before Ontario Court Judge Gerald Lapkin, who told him, you know what, you had a ticket to ride, not a pass to harass. Yeah, that's what the judge said. Now, it's just amazing because you have a prosecutor zealous prosecutor, who asked the judge to impose a sentence of 6 months in jail. But the judge doubled that and gave Brazeau a total sentence of 20 months. Now, he had a couple of previous convictions of doing the same thing, you see. His conduct did not involve profanity. It didn't involve violence. No one was shot. No one was punched. No one was threatened. But you've got an activist judge.
Hold on. No one was threatened. What about the religion of those in question who he marginalized or ridiculed? They were threatened. In which
I don't agree with
point,
that.
Well, no, in theory, by perception. And this is one thing that, really, when somebody says something bad about Jesus, does it threaten our faith? Are we less faithful, or does it change the way we believe?
No, and hell no.
And nor should it. So why are these people so insecure? Their God can't take care of the retribution for those who come against him? What's the problem?
Good point. It's a good point. But you see, this is all part and parcel to the bigger picture. The bigger picture is a one-world religion. And how to do this, we're telling you right now, the Paris shootings, the assassinations, the executions in Paris shows the contemptuous intolerance of Islam. Now, let me say that again. The Paris shootings shows the contemptuous intolerance of Islam that is inherent within Islam. So the globalists know they can control, manipulate, manage the Muslims. Now, you're going to get people on the internet that will criticize the Muslims and say it's a religion of pieces, and to the extent, to the large extent, they're correct. But they're not going far enough, and I've said this before. You've got to look beyond that. You've got to look beyond. Look at the handlers. Look at who's managing this subset, and to what end. Because you see, most of our Christian pastors and ministers, they enjoy, or they will willingly involve themselves in various interfaith dialogues, okay? Ostensibly to bring forth more understanding between the various religions represented within their communities. We saw this after 9/11. A lot of people rushed to reassure local imams, the Muslim clergy, that there wouldn't be any retaliation against their followers in mosques, and there was none. Nothing notable. While you've got the Christians out there engaged in interfaith tolerance, you've got the Muslims exhibiting contemptuous intolerance, which is inherent within their religion. That's why they are so easily managed. That's why they're dupes. They're playing right into the hands. They're really an integral operational asset. Yeah, I couldn't. Sorry, it didn't flow well. Of the globalists. This is where it's all leading. Islam is a religion and a state. The 1.4 billion followers worldwide is rapidly growing. It's rapidly growing here in the States. It's a culture. It's a cult that dictates whom one should worship, how to dress, what to eat, how to answer the call of nature. That's correct. One should invest their money, how to have sex, when to beat your wife, when you are required to kill.
Wait a minute.
What?
There's limits to when? You can't just do it 'cause?
Well, no, I mean, you could, I suppose. There's a recreational side, and then there's a mandate.
It's legal to beat your wife whenever you want.
Oh, no, it's required when it's...
Required?
Oh, yeah.
I'm converting. I'm kidding.
No,
my wife would beat me.
Well, I got to tell you, look, there's... read the Quran, read the Hadith. I mean, all of this, and we could cite surah after surah after surah. But look, Islam, while Islam's ultimate goal is to rule the world under the single caliphate, it is the globalist desire, ultimate goal, to rule the world under a single world religion, of which Islam will play a very important role in the creation of that religion. And the apostasy that we will see based on this objective is key to really understanding the one world religion aspect of the globalists. In modern history, and 9/11 had to happen, by the way. 9/11 had to happen on that very specific date, at that very specific time. 9/11 had to happen. In the run-up to 9/11, did we not see so many clues in looking back? So many clues. And even the way the towers stood. Now, I realize there were other targets on that date, but the numerology aspect of 9/11, could we not say as well that 9/11, September 11th, was in fact? Can we stipulate that September 11th is in fact the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? And if so, the perversion of that date would fit well within the globalist agenda?
We can't stipulate to the exact date, but we do know from previous guests, from other scholars and people who have studied this, that even the Bible states that the time of Jesus' birth was not a time of in the winter, or they were, I believe it, there's a reference to crops being harvested, and meaning it would be more in the fall time than in any other time of the year.
Well, I'll tell you what, Exo-Vaticana, Tom Horn, I agree with that. On page 326 of Tom Horn's book, Exo-Vaticana, excuse me, he references Dr. Martin's book, The Star That Astonished the World. Excuse me. You can find that free on the internet. You can follow you can find it free on the internet. There's also a short video out there about the date of Christ's birth using astronomy. What do you call that? Astronomical software.
Yeah, there's a program that Stan talks about that I have on my computer. It's called Stellarium. Now, what Stellarium does, it gives you the ability to put yourself in any point of the globe and bring the time to any time period you want, showing what would be in the sky in what area in a certain time, and you can go back and forward as long as you want. It's a great program for those. I use it all the time when I'm outside with my telescope. I have Stellarium, and I have a satellite tracker to make sure when I'm looking at, zooming across the sky aren't satellites, and the planets are where they're supposed to be.
All right. But having said that, imagine yourself a devious globalist who's you're reporting to Satan, basically, right? Just imagine yourself that for a second. Here you are.
Now, do we report email or by phone
you get daily text from Satan on your iPhone, and then you've got an email account to Satan's personal email account, and you've got to report to him, basically. So just imagine yourself in that position, and imagine yourself knowing, or at least believing that you know, and there's a difference, when Christ was born. Actually, the actual date of our Lord and Savior. And just let's stipulate for this discussion anyway that it's correct, that it's September 11th, 2 BC, 3 BC, based on a number of factors, including but not limited to the stars. So how best would you, what would be the ultimate way of really ruining or perverting the birthday of Jesus Christ? Would 9/11 suffice? Would the event of 9/11 suffice? 2001 suffice? Or be a good start?
There's a few ways. One, they've done it through the commercialization of Christmas and removing.
Right.
Say Christmas, December 25th was the actual date of birthday, and we'll just go with that narrative. They've removed all references to Jesus. They've set up a system where now, you can't. We see it in the schools. There was a story last Christmas where a family, mother and her two daughters, were sending out Christmas cards to soldiers overseas, and they were not allowed to send the cards because they had references to Jesus inside of those cards. They have taken the reason for the season, as some would say, out of the holiday, and instead introduced a system of perverseness that was completely contrary to every and anything the Lord ever taught while he was here on earth. So in that way, they've done so. Now, if his birthday was on a different day, this is what gets me. If it was on September 11th, so few people would know, care, or even look at that as a point of importance.
Okay,
I'm not saying it's not important.
But when you're when you're doing an investigation, the motive of the perpetrator is not important to you. It's important to the perpetrator, but not to you, right? So we're looking at this as cumulatively as investigators in the aggregate, looking at this as investigators saying, okay, wait, what's the motive here? Or why September 11th? Why not the 10th or the 12th or why not July 4th or whatever? It doesn't really matter. It matters to them because it matters to what they believe, the globalists, the people behind. You see, because belief is the driver of action, and it matters what they believe. So if they believe 9/11 was the birth of Jesus, then of course they want to pervert that day. They want to offer sacrifices of that day. The email comes in from Satan. The text to your iPhone comes in from Satan. Mr. Globalist, hey, we got to do this on this date and this time, and it's all set up, and using the occult symbolism and so on. And look at the symbolism of the Twin Towers. And there is a point to this, folks, really. But look at the symbolism of the Twin Towers, how they were built. And there are videos out there, folks, you can look at. But if you look at the videos, or if you look at the Twin Towers,
Crowning a Tyrant, One World Freedom Tower by Jonathan Kleck is the more popular one, and it does a very good job of explaining what you're getting into.
All right, yeah. The bottom line here is if you look at the structures themselves, you look at the run-up to 9/11, you look at but in particular the structures themselves, if you lighten them up, and the way they were built and the way they're constructed and such, it almost looks like strands of DNA, two side-by-side strands of DNA. containing 23 chromosomes to 46 in total. You've got two different strands. How about the lineage of Cain versus the lineage of the devil, shall I say, on Earth here, lineage of Cain, versus the lineage of Adam, the wheat and the tares. Are we not seeing the wheat and the tares, perhaps, represented in the Twin Towers? And you can't tell the difference between the two until they're, grown, or I shouldn't say that. Once they're grown, you have to separate the wheat and the tares
until the harvest.
Thank you. Right. So, bang, the towers go down. What results from that? Not tragedy, but that murderous execution of a globalist plan. You've got the construction of the One Freedom Tower. It's the combination, is it not, perhaps, of the wheat and the tares to bring out a third hybrid kind of civilization in your face. Look, here's what we did. We combined the serpent seed with the seed of man. And not only did we do that, we crowned that particular seed, that DNA line, with a spire, with a minaret. And we, not only that, in front of it, on the very ground where many people perished, were sacrificed, we also put in the reverse of the Kabbalah, or the stone, I should say. I'm sorry, the stone in
Mecca. When One World Trade Center was hollowed out, before they restarted rebuilding the One World Freedom Tower, it was said that you could take Mecca, turn it upside down, and fit it perfectly into the hole that was left in the New York City Trade Center tower hole.
Correct. And now think about this as well. We had talked about this in previous programs. Actually, we talked about this even before the program even existed. The Memorial Flight 93 Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. If you look at that very closely, and then I talked with the gentleman who did the bulk of the investigation, and I have not been able to really find, well, I haven't really tried, but I haven't talked with him recently, but that memorial itself represented or exhibited signs of a memorial to the terrorists, to Islam. It's look, I know you might think, well, this is all crazy, but it's all out in the open. And you know what? People are laughing at all of us. The globalists are laughing at us because they're doing this. They're putting up these memorials, and they're saying, they're making fun of us because we don't see it.
And they can laugh all they want because the joke's on them in the end, because this battle is for not our lives, not our minds, but the battle is for our souls. And they can try to corrupt and deceive our minds. They can try to corrupt and deceive our bodies. But the soul is something that we would have to give up willingly.
But you know something, you're correct. But if we can expose, and this is where you and I are going to come to a Nerf bat kind of thing.
We've upgraded the guns.
Yes, right.
Guns, thanks to John. So
I still like that.
Get those ready.
Personal. But think about this. If they can deceive us with things like the One Freedom Tower and like the 93 Memorial, if they can deceive us with things like, well, we need to pass legislation, laws that would prohibit the defamation of Christianity even, wouldn't it be great to eliminate the upside-down crucifix in the jar of urine? I mean, that would be a very, very great thing. But see, the purpose, what they're doing, or what they will do, is create the legislation that will ban all proselytizing. It'll ban all Christian type of proselytizing, in addition to the Muslims. But we're being set up for this. But see, if they are doing this right in front of us, and they're deceiving us right in our faces, don't you think that the degree of deception that we are going to get, you cannot blow this off, Joe. You can't say, well, they're going to lose in the end because we're already saved. Well, look, you've got to understand the deception runs deep, man.
See, well, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, yes, they've already lost. God's already won. God has fulfilled his part of his deal by coming here in the flesh, dying on the cross, bearing the burden of all sins of all mankind.
Agreed.
We have to do our part. and that's what's left. And what they're trying to do, they being the globalists, are trying to stop, interfere, distract, whatever way and capacity they can, us from completing our half of the deal.
But having the knowledge, people, my people perish for lack of knowledge. That knowledge that is being referenced, I believe, is the very knowledge that we're talking about here. Not to inflate.
Think about this, though. The people perishing for the lack of knowledge. In Daniel, it talked about, though, in this time being a time where knowledge would be so prevalent, it would increase so much and be everywhere. So at a time where knowledge is increasing and is abound for everyone to find, yet the Lord's people perish for a lack of knowledge. So do we not have to be careful of the knowledge that we are in here, Daniel 12:4.
Oh,
but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal thy book even into the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And that's in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. And
but isn't
we're talking about this time now.
But see, as we seek that knowledge, don't we have to have? It's not to say that we should not seek knowledge. We should do it in a manner that glorifies God. So we have to do it covered by the blood, and in a manner not like investigators of the carnal, but investigators of both. I mean, the spiritual and carnal realm.
And this was said to me by a friend before the show, and put it in a good way, separating the temporal knowledge from the spiritual knowledge. What they have done is convoluted it so much that people are so absorbed with the temporal knowledge, with the knowledge of the here now. What can we do? What's going on in the world? What's going on with the economy? And the knowledge of the truth, which is the truth being Jesus Christ and His Word. That true knowledge is moved aside. And John said in one of the in the New Testament, for this, I fear people will miss the simplicity that is in Christ. Meaning, that there is a way to the Lord to stay on His path without being, perverted by other knowledge. Now there is we have the Gnostics, which is knowledge or wisdom. These are what the mystery religions and Freemasonry, other secret societies, use as their God, whether it's stated or not. But there is a knowledge out there that is so deceiving because it offers any and all alternatives to Christ being the one true God. And if we don't have a good foundation of scriptural understanding and a good, if our faith is not founded, does not have a good foundation, we can be moved from that foundation or moved from that understanding of Christ by a different knowledge, which was taught by a philosopher or so on and so on. But here in Second Corinthians 11:3, but I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. And there is, a lot of people, I think they're referred theologians, they say, who go through this Gnostic information. And Paul McGuire does a great job of this. He has a fantastic foundational understanding of the Lord, and after that, you go back and go through some of these other writers and philosophers and what they had in mind. And I always say, as a healthy rule, if you're going to read, for example, Plato's Republic, you're going to read 10 pages of Plato's Republic, make sure that same day you read 10 pages of the Bible. And I know I may have got a little bit off track of what knowledge and information and learning you were talking about.
I agree. Because, look, before the show, and I'll just share this, at some point before the show, before I open my mouth or write my notes out for the show and study what we're going to do, research what we're going to talk about, you got to hit your knees. I hit my knees. And I pray for discernment. I pray for the wisdom that I pray with all of my heart that I do not say anything, either intentionally, written down, or even remotely errant, that would lead anyone astray. And because the responsibility that we have, and folks, this goes to you too, the listener. You've got a responsibility by yourself, don't you, to take what we say, to prayer.
Yes. Don't take anything we say as face value, just like you would with the rest of the news or any other person, from a pastor to a news reporter. You take everything that you hear and take it to the Lord in prayer and take it to the Scriptures for, correct. Make sure it's correct, make sure it's sound, and make sure it's biblical. Because, as we said earlier, the Word of the Lord and His speaking to us through the Holy Spirit is the only truth that is true. Everything else is subject to that. And if something somebody says is not lining up with what God's Word says for us, then obviously that they're wrong. And if we're wrong, we do so by mistake, and we apologize, and that's something I pray for all the time too.
Right.
But there are many people out there that do this and spread information to lead people astray on purpose, and I can't fathom doing that, because it's not only damaging to somebody else's growth mentally and spiritually, but you are putting them behind the eight ball in a worse off situation than if they never would have heard you in the first place.
Exactly. And the litmus test, or the test I use, well, not the test, but just consider this. In my mind, I envision when I speak, I'm talking to my wife, my youngest daughter, my grandson, and I'm giving them the knowledge I believe I found. So that's how I approach it. I wouldn't say anything on air that I wouldn't say privately or in the company of my wife or my youngest daughter, my grandson. I think that's important. So just to let you know what angle we're coming from here. So, having said that, but the bottom line here, the Paris is instrumental. People will say, "Well, Paris is a false flag." Well, rather than saying Paris is a false flag, do you mean that there were no victims? No, of course not. There were victims. Paris was a very complex paramilitary operation that has similarities to Boston in certain respects in terms of the brothers. And look, they knew the people involved, the brothers involved in Paris, in the Paris assassinations. One was arrested, convicted, and jailed in 2005 and 2008. For funneling terrorists to the Middle East or to Iraq and Afghanistan. Inspire magazine had published the threats to this particular magazine. There was definitely surveillance, pre-operational surveillance conducted on this magazine. There were a number of things. So it was an event that perhaps before and after the fact is being managed. And a narrative is being built for a specific purpose. I think that everyone needs to understand that. And the look and the response by Obama should tell you a lot. We covered that. I think we mentioned that yesterday, during the show yesterday. Or I'm not even sure what program it was, if it was this program, Joe, or if it was some other program. But the way Obama responded publicly to the assassinations, the murder, the executions in Paris, should tell Americans pretty much all they need to know about Barack Hussein Obama when it comes to Islamic terrorism. So, having said that, but folks, please understand, it's bigger than than Muslims in Islam itself, because Islam is a tool of the globalists, much like terrorism is a tactic of the Muslims. The Muslims in Islam is a tool and a tactic in an end game for the globalists, or operational tool for the globalists. This is what we're seeing. But people are stopping too short, or they're taking it to extreme and almost silly areas, I believe. So the truth is there in the middle, where you have people like Brzezinski in that all-important clip we played saying, well, terrible thing happened. However, and it's always after that but or however that we have to pay attention. We can't slander the. He call him the prophet. I don't call him a prophet. Muhammad is a pedophile. On record, okay. But anyway, listen to the language. Listen to the language that they use. And I'm not deliberately insulting. I'm not doing this for a shock effect. Just look at the biography, the stated known biography of Muhammad, and what he had done in the marriage and stuff, and look at the elements of Islam. I'm not saying anything for shock value. This is all part and parcel to Islam, the cult of Islam. And again, I'm not saying the cult for shock value. I'm saying it because, by definition, that's exactly what it is, and it's manageable. And having said that, it becomes an asset of the globalists to achieve a specific end, which goes back to Pike and goes back to Mazzini. And if you don't believe that, well, that's fine. But it's interesting how this is all playing out to that effect, isn't it? How World War III will be perhaps between. Will it not be perhaps between the Muslims and Christians, or between the West and the Middle Eastern countries? Could very well be, but the larger part of that. Go back even further. Go back to the real big root, not the fruit, but the root of the evil that stands before us. And that's the bigger picture of the globalization of the one world government. And again, people say, "Oh, come on, shut up, just shut up about this." No, it's the Bohemian Grove people, it's the Illuminati, it's the CFR, it's the Trilateral Commission, it's the Council of 300, it's all of this together, is it not? They're all they're all part and parcel to a larger agenda. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. All right. With that, we're at our break. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the third and final hour of this Friday edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. This is January 9th, 2015. I apologize. And thank you, Bob and Maggie, who sent us the email that Obama spoke in front of the UN. He said, "The UN future does not belong to those who slander Islam." That was Obama speaking at the UN. Not too surprising. We are going to go to the phones. Let's take your calls. We're going to go to the international line first. I think this is country code 33. Not sure. International caller, you're up first, live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report.
Well, hello, Doug and John. This is Constance calling from Bordeaux. How are you?
Oh. Hi, Constance.
Yes, I would like to say Happy New Year, and I hope you had a lovely Christmas holiday. Well, I would like to. Yes?
Yeah, we wish you the
I
same.
Would like to
publish.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
you.
Go ahead. There's a delay.
Yes, I would like to comment on all the things that are happening here in Europe. Europe is particularly has become a cesspool. You have problems with open borders. Well, you know, as soon as the EU, we have open borders. And since our borders are open, we have been flooded with masses and masses and masses of immigration. And as you also know, maybe a lot of your listeners do not know, France in Europe has a very high number of Islamic immigrants, and especially now since the Middle East, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. Not only do we have from North Africa, but we are absolutely flooded, and we have these incentives that our governments can do nothing because we are in Europe now. We have open borders, and they can come in, and it is not immigration any longer. It is migration, and it's uncontrolled, and there's nothing we can do now. And here we have all this mass migration that are claiming not only political asylum, but now here in France, you can claim economic asylum. And that is an absolute absurd. here in Europe. And it's not only in France, but in every European country that you go to, they have masses of illegal immigration, and Europe is doing nothing but letting the borders open and flooding. As soon as I heard about Paris, it reminded me of Gladio, but more, it had the same footprint, a little bit of like Boston, because they said it was brothers, and the story kept changing. And yes, I was reading a lot of political papers that were questioning who commanded this, because the government, Merkel claimed, and everybody is siding with Islam. So there's a political Marxist movement here that we have to accept. Islam here, the Ottoman Empire, has already conquered Europe, because also, like in America, our children in the school have to learn Islam. Our government is doing nothing. If you want to talk about Christianity, though yes, a little bit, but Islam or mosques are opening up all over France, all over in Europe. We are having mosques, we are having immigration, and nothing is here. Nobody is talking about it. Maybe now, maybe with the movement that happened, unfortunately, I am very sorry about the families of the journalists. But we don't have freedom of speech here in Europe anymore. America is still the most free country in the world, even though I hardly recognize America anymore. You are still very much freer than we are here in Europe, because we have no freedom of speech. And if you want to prove that, just go anywhere and speak publicly against Islam or immigration or banking or anything that our governments are promoting, especially now that we have all socialism, this Marxist socialist, and especially with our François Hollande, who is a person that for over almost 40 years, he is in politics. He has gone to the most elite schools. 35 or 36 of his ministers has come from his graduating class, but he does nothing. His government has been a total failure, and maybe I don't believe that in 2016 we have political elections like you have in America. We will have elections here also, but it is the same thing, because when Sarkozy was in government, even before that Chirac, it was the same politics. So it does not matter who you are voting for. It still continues with the same program that we will have to become one united Europe, and mass immigration, that we are on the course of civilization, that we have to be, that we have to follow the program of the government officials. But I hope the Europeans finally wake up to what is happening here. But I doubt it.
I didn't want to overtalk you, so I let that pause extend there.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100% that even today, by the current standards, America is much freer than Europe. Where do you see? You reside, or you're in France. Do you see the execution, the events of the past few days? How is this going to play out in your estimation, given your knowledge of the culture, the customs, the government, the social structure in France? How is this going to play out?
Well, I think that according to the program of the EU, because first of all, we don't control anything anymore. Our political leaders, we have all of these Marxist socialists now that are leading the majority of the governments here in Europe, that most the communist Marxists are leading the EU Parliament and in Brussels. And I see that this attempt is, I think there is a hand behind it that I don't understand all of the pieces on the chessboard. but this was done on purpose to lead us somewhere. I don't know, because of our France was arguing, France and Germany was asking America because we was not going along with the sanctions that we are having with Russia. Actually, before the Soviet Olympics, we had actually good relations with Putin. I'm not saying I love Putin. I'm not saying I agree with all the politics, but we do a lot of business with Russia, and especially small and medium-sized businesses, even growth. We have a lot of relationships with Russia. And it was one of my own questions in my own head, if this attack was sent as a message to France, is a warning that we should go along with Syria, with the Middle East, against Ukraine now, because actually before there was no problems with Putin and Russia until the sanctions, and now they are fighting that certain countries like France and Germany does not want to go along with the sanctions. And actually I am very close to the Russian community here in Bordeaux. I can speak Russian, my children can speak Russian, and I'm very close to the Russian associations here in Bordeaux. And we have very good relations. It is only now that with all the problems in the Ukraine, with NATO, with America, and because I think a lot of things are happening on purpose, because there is now becoming a lot of anti-American sentiment now here in Europe, that people are tired of following American government. I don't say we are against American people, but, there is resentment worldwide now against America, that I think this is being done on purposely, but I don't know exactly to what means, where this is actually heading here.
Very important observations, very critical observations from from France and from Europe. My goodness, and I really never gave that a thought. The framing what happened in Paris as perhaps, I never equated that with.
There's so many pieces to this, because it's not just black and white. You can't, because you can say. They have so many hands of this,
True.
First of all, we are very bad financially here in France. We have so much, unemployment. We have no economy. What are we? We're exporting wine, cheese. Our Airbus is a total disaster. We had to lower the price of Airbus or of exportation. We cannot export Airbus to Russia anymore because there are sanctions. We have massive welfare here that we can no longer maintain. But it is part of the European United Nations right. Welfare is a right, a human right here in Europe. So our economies are really very, very bad, and all the economies are bad. And I think countries are now in a desperate move to do something. So it's very complicated. I don't know exactly where we are going, but it's very desperate here in Europe, very extremely desperate.
Interesting observations, Constance. My goodness,
I'll let you go now and take some other calls. I just want to comment on this because you have very good observations, but this is looking very much like the Boston bombers, because I knew when they were saying, because it does not make sense. Why would a professional terrorist leave identity in a car? It does not make sense, and I knew they would not capture the people. They would either find them dead or they patches. It's the story that you cannot, and the story is changing every day. And you cannot believe, but I do not know where it is going with this. Well, thank you very much, Doug and Joe, and I will say good night to you now.
Good night. Thank you so very much, Constance. Thank you. God bless you. What a treasure.
God bless you too, and all your listeners. Goodbye.
All right. Goodbye. You know, what a great. We just love Constance. We really do. She's very informed and very informed and very well spoken, very articulate. I want to mention too, when she was talking about the Sarkozy, she briefly mentioned Sarkozy in there. I recall doing a radio show. A couple of radio shows with Dwight Schultz. Now, if that name rings a bell. It's not that I'm name dropping, of course, Dwight Schultz, but he was. If that name rings a bell, you might know him as the back in the the 80s, I guess it was the A-Team. He was Howling Mad Murdoch, and nice guy, very nice man, and very down to earth guy. But we did some radio together, and he was really into the government of Sarkozy and really backing the government. And we had off-air conversations about Sarkozy and about his handling of the Muslim problem. And the reason I bring that up is, are we not seeing today, just like we saw the handling with George W. Bush, are we not seeing the blowback, the effects of the Sarkozy government in France taking root today, or at least coming to fruit perhaps today, that we saw develop under Sarkozy, just like we saw under George W. Bush in the wake of 9/11, Sarkozy in the wake of America's 9/11, it's kind of very parallel administrations, and the reason I bring him into this is because, you know, he was, and I think that there are many people who still hold to the narrative, very high-profile people and very outspoken people who will hold to the narrative of, the neocon narrative, perhaps. Let me just say it that way. And Constance has come on and shared the results, the end game results, at least the current status of what's taking place in France and Europe in general. So that's very interesting, and it's all lining up now. It really is. It's all lining up and becoming clearer as we go through things. So
let's go to area code 617 next. You're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report. What's on your mind tonight?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
Good, yeah. So this is Dustin, and I made some predictions, I think, the last show you had of the year, and I was the first to make them, and much to my chagrin, they're coming to pass.
That's right.
I wanted to comment on what's going on here, what you guys have been talking about. First of all, let's start with this Biggie Brzezinski, who I studied under, and I did a little thing at the JFK School of Government, and I met one of his associates, and I want you guys to know that he may be old, but he has disciples that are out there, and so when people like him and Kissinger, they seemingly never die, but they have disciples out there, and they're doing the work. A very interesting thing about Mika, his daughter Mika. People have brought up the fact that she wrote an autobiography. You can look into this, called All Things at Once. And in there, she describes her father having diplomats over for, to stay over. And as a 11-year-old, purposefully spilling water on a Chinese diplomat's lap and having to wipe it off with her hands. Now you know what that means. And it's interesting that, and she describes her mother picking her up from school one day covered in blood. The other thing you talked about, and this was the prediction I made, is that we'd see the continuing erosion of our language through law. And I'm a law student. Now you talked about freedom of speech and things like that. When you walk into a court, now hold on, now these Bill of Rights by these so-called founding fathers, which I call into question, and we put God before any founding father. I was one of the last people up in the Washington Monument, and the first light of the day hits that obelisk and goes to the Congress building and illuminates the Congress building. It's designed just like Rome, and no building can be built higher than the Washington, D.C. Monument, which is 666 feet. When you go into a courtroom, you're always at war. Look at next time you go into a courtroom, look at the state flag, look at the flags that they have up. They are around them. You'll find a golden thread around them. Whenever that golden thread was flown at sea, when you cross the bar, you're essentially under Admiralty maritime law, and you are at war. The government is always at war against its people. So they fly that flag. You are considered to be an idiot. That's why you need to have a lawyer speak to you. It's all in Black's Law Dictionary, which is a grimoire. That's why I fight on the side of Christ. I'm using law as a tool for that. Anyway, you made a lot of points. I'm just getting my notes here. Now, what we see also, I've just had the privilege to be in these sort of elite circles as an insider. And the 9/11 Commission, one of my professors was on that commission. Now, if you remember, if you just look at the 9 and 11, that means something, and Doug and Joe, you guys can investigate into this, what the number 9 to 11 is. It skips 10, the number of completion. So what you're doing is you're going from 9 to 11 without the 10. And the 11, the Twin Towers, can also represent Yaakov and Boaz. Now, it's the center that counts, okay? So in the middle of that event, now, I mean, if you want to say who was behind it or whatever, I don't care. But the fact is that it was used as sorcery. Another tower came down, too. And people often forget that. But what this was a ritual sacrifice. And it was not a sacrifice to the god. It was a sacrifice of the goddess, Columbia. Now, if you trace the symbology of this, Columbia, the goddess of America, this all goes back to the secret destiny of America and
goes back to Manly P. Hall. Yeah, yep.
Exactly. Right, what you were talking about earlier this week. This is an enactment of, first of all, trauma on a worldwide scale. So they can, it's Hegelian dialectic, right? So you have the antithesis, you have the thesis, right, and you bring about the synthesis, which is the freedom.
Combined with trauma-based mind control. That's correct. And I didn't want you to gloss over that. It's a combination using trauma-based mind control. Yes.
Yeah, you can please interrupt me at any time. It's a pleasure. But what we had in that, now, when the towers were gone and they were mulling over, oh, geez, which tower should we erect and stuff. Well, I happened to attend a very, very elite liberal arts school in the western part of Massachusetts. And we had a professor who was on the Bundestag, which is the German Congress, if you will. And they erected, and he was on that. He designed the memorial to the Holocaust. Okay, so the Germans erected their own. I mean, their own memory of the atrocities they did. And now I have to see if it's actually a mockery of it or not. But I was one of the first. I'll cut to the chase. I was one of the. There was probably a handful of people in there. I'm talking less than 10. I was one of them. This professor who was on this 9/11 commission with Giuliani, and he's an expert in memorials with the world over. I happened to see the finalists, the ones that the public really didn't get to see. Now, if you think that the Freedom Tower, which is the synthesis, now you're right to point out, Doug, that this is just like the UN, built upon blood, right?
That's right.
The blood of human beings. Now, the synthesis is nothing but the way they also design the light. It's completely occult, and not just hidden, but I mean by occult. I shouldn't use that word. It's just evil. It's Satan.
Right. I mean, look at the pyramids, the inverse of the inverse pyramids, the pyramids themselves, the construction of the tower. I mean, we could spend an entire program on the One World Freedom Tower, and look at what Obama signed. He signed the highest beam of that tower with "We shall rebuild, we will come back stronger," and I can't remember what the third line was. But certainly it wasn't an occultic ceremony, one that really defaced the memory of those who perished or were sacrificed in this. And you're absolutely correct to say that this was built really as a tribute. Look, I look at this One World Freedom Tower as the trophy of the Illuminati or Illuminists, and people might call me crazy, that also incorporates Islam, and this will be the fulfillment of a one world religious system, one world government system as well, but in particular the religious aspect of this. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. And no, thank you. And I would love to refer listeners to a book which is now pretty hard to find, but it's simply called Trilateralism, the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning for World Management, edited by Holly Scalar. And one of my professors was in this book, and so is Zbigniew Brzezinski.
That was published back in 1980. Just so people know. The book Trilateralism, the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning for World Management, that was published back in 1980. And you can find, I believe you can find hardcovers, paperbacks, used copies of this book. I believe it's out of print now, but yes, you're correct. It's 600 pages. Yeah.
Yes, and I would also, if you want to look at a book that, I was really into politics. I'm more into, God now, but I read the Eternities, not so much the Times. But I wanted to give Christians some hope, how we can fight back against, this spiritual warfare that we see. One thing is that the Christians, above all, are separated because we don't believe we know that we are at war. We are at war of principles and principalities and powers, and that we better wake up because the war's going on, and you know it, Doug, and Joe, you know it, and many of the listeners know it. Many of your guests know it. we better, just like a third baseman. A batter comes up to the plate. He may not hit a line drive right to the, right over to him, but he's well prepared. We as Christians must be just as prepared, spiritually, provisionally, and with our families, and we need to get together. We need to come together. I can't find the passage right now, but I had a really great passage of more of that. But here it is. This is St. Paul. Let me just get to it real quick. But I would also. This is a great. We have to fight. Okay, here we go. Because what we're seeing is the poison of subjectivism, and
interesting way to put that, but interesting. The poison of subjectivism. That could also be,
which is basically postmodernism, and a great book is The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, who I know a lot of people think, there's a lot of, people who think he was a pig, and he was an atheist, but converted to Christianity. And there's some people don't know the real history of how he was converted. He was we don't have many prophets. But anyway, so there are many ways which we have cynicism, we have rational secularism, we have an attack not just against Christianity, you see, but against religion, period. Okay? It's either is going to be their religion.
Well, and I think that's kind of what I was getting at initially at the beginning of the program, or with the program, was it's going to be all inclusive, under the guise of, or under the pretext of protecting Christianity, the very protections for ostensibly to protect Christianity will be the various, or the exact weapons that will be used to neuter the Christianity and the protections of the speech thereof. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I was getting.
And I'm sorry, I can't. I have the passage bookmarked, but really, the main point is that this effeminized, transsexual, transhumanist agenda, and what a great show last night with Steve Quayle and Wednesday. I'm sorry.
Wednesday, that was fantastic.
That was absolutely fantastic, and I just want to thank you and Joe, and I just love to hear the other listeners, and I'll write to you guys, and I'll shoot you guys an email passage. So thank you very much. God bless you.
All right.
Have a great weekend. Stay warm, and hope to meet you someday.
All right, buddy. Thank you much, Dustin. Appreciate the call.
Have a great night.
That's exactly right, what he said. Interesting perspective from him, too, having contact with the various people he had through educational and social circles. You've got to take a look, and at least I believe, anyway, folks, that we have to, at this point in the game, and it's not a game. At this point, we've got to tap into as many sources. If you're working a complex murder investigation or a complex fraud investigation, you want to talk to as many people as possible. Now, you also want to keep people out of that investigative process that have really no bearing on the investigation. You want to focus in on the people with the knowledge, and of course, that's why a lot of our callers are extremely important. Now, you can seek counsel through other callers or other witnesses or other professionals or other people, as we often do in investigations. So that's I mean, all of this is just marvelous. I look at our pool of listeners as perhaps the most important part of the program. But go ahead, Joe.
All right, let's go to area code 620 next. 620, we're coming to you now. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hi, Doug and Joe. I'm a first-time caller, and I listen to you guys all the time. And my name is Susan, and I live in Kansas. And I thought tonight when you were talking about 9/11, I would like to give witness to you as to what happened to me.
Sure.
Before Christmas, I have studied probably for the last 6 years and am deeply involved in the birth of Christ, wanting to know his true birthday. So I've read many books, taken it from the Bible, and I was putting a letter together to send out in my Christmas card. So the week before Christmas on Monday, I awoke and I had a dream that when I woke up, I was told in my ear, a voice said, after 3 days, I'll tell you the meaning, and remember the number 3. It's very important. And I thought, wow, that's really strange. And, of course, I kind of shared the dream with my family. The next day, which was Tuesday, I was doing some ironing, and you know how sometimes the water will come out of the iron? And the water came out of the iron, and I thought, oh, I must have overfilled it or something. And all of a sudden, the molecules of the water began to kind of dance around on my ironing board, and they made a picture. And I thought, wow, this is so weird. And normally I don't have my phone, with me everywhere I go, but I had my phone, and I took a picture of what was occurring.
Okay.
To the side of this picture, the water molecules started to move around, and another picture kind of formed. It was one picture, but 2 parts. Let's put it that way. One picture, but 2 parts. I thought, wow, that's really strange. So then Wednesday goes by, Thursday goes by, Friday goes by. I'm getting in my car to go visit my daughter. And I had all my Christmas cards and my letter and everything that I was going to put together. And I'm going down the road, and I'm in deep, deep fog. And I began to pray. And I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, I've done your work. I've studied, and I've gone by the Scripture. I just want to know, is what I'm writing, is it true? Don't let me send this letter out. I want to be a testimony. I want to be a good vessel.
Right.
And
I get that.
The Lord came over me, and he said, I told you I would tell you in 3 days. And, of course, I was I was shocked. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe it. And I thought, well, I have to believe this because if I act like Zechariah, I don't want to, lose my tongue. And I said, okay, Lord, I'm scared. Help me, walk me through this. And he said, it's in symbolism. And I said, I don't understand. Just take my hand, please. And all of a sudden, it was just like spiritual blinders had been taken off of me. And I went, oh, I get it. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the dream.
All right.
The dream was I suddenly got sat down inside of my grandmother's home that I knew when I was a small child. And standing next to me was my father, my earthly father.
Right.
he passed in 2001. And he grabbed my hand and he said to me, "You've come home." And I thought, in my dream, I'm dreaming this, I thought, did I just die and go to heaven? Like, what is going on here? And so, and I'm quite happy, and I go, oh, well, this is great. I love being here. And I looked around, and in my head, I said, oh, I've got to put those glasses away because my grandmother had given me a box of glasses. Now, the reason I got the glasses was because when I married, my last name began with a K. My grandmother's last name was a K, and all these glasses that she had the initial K on it. So in the dream, I go to put the glasses away. So when the Lord is telling me, to put on my spiritual eyes, it's in spiritualism, I remembered the letter K. The letter K is the 11th letter in the alphabet.
Right.
What I was asking him was the birth of Christ. And he said, remember 3. So I knew I had the 3 BC, and I knew because I had researched it is September the 11th, 3 BC.
All right, which is consistent with my research and the suggestive application of that by Tom Horn, and I mean, and it's important.
Deeply involved in Scripture. Yes.
Okay.
And then, so now let me tell you, I thought, what the heck? What are those 2 pictures? What do those 2 pictures represent? I never got it. Wednesday, of course, everything happened over in Paris. I'm going to tell you what the first picture was. The first picture is a jihadist gunman with an arch over his head.
All right.
When I first saw it, I thought, oh, is something going to happen in St. Louis? The arch in St. Louis. So in my mind, I knew it had to do with an arch and a gunman. And it looks like a jihadi. You know what I'm saying? To me, it was a jihadi gunman.
All right.
Now, to the side of the arch, which is the second picture, there was a plane kind of in the northwest or the top northwest part of the picture to the side of this arch. In the middle, there are 2 cells or 2 clouds, maybe like an explosion. And in the bottom, there's a helicopter.
Wow.
So today, when I saw the 2 explosions that were in 2 separate areas, the one being northwest of the airport where the plane was, and we saw all the helicopters flying around, I thought, wow, the Lord sent me 2 witnesses to me, to confirm to me that what I had done was spot on.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Now, how do those 2, or do they not? How do the birth of Christ and the images that appeared?
Because they're the 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses that I have to show.
Oh.
That, you see what I'm saying? Because God tells you in the Bible there's always 2 witnesses.
I gotcha.
And so they were 2 separate. They were the same picture, but they happened in 2 portions. I knew they were separate, but they were of the same happening.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's what I said. Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty complex imagery on the cover of an ironing board. I suspect it was the cover of the ironing board that you have.
I bought a new cover.
Yeah. I need a new cover for mine. I do the ironing. Well, I share in the ironing, so I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, and most people I'm sure do. Interesting tale.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I follow. Wow. I follow you guys. I read Tom Horn. I read the Bible. I study, and it was just a spiritual moment that happened to me that I kind of wanted to share with everybody, because I do think it's important to look into, to follow, and to understand that the Bible can tell you and can point. If you know I had to dig in the Old Testament. I had to learn what the courses were, what the 8th course of Abaya was, how it fell onto the Hebraic calendar. They go by a different calendar than we do.
Sure.
So 9/11, it's basically Tishri 1, or the first day of the 7th month of the Jewish year, which is the Feast of Trumpets.
Correct. Yes, you've done your homework well. We've gone over this, not publicly as much as we could.
And a lot of people don't get it, but it takes time to put the pieces together.
Indeed, it does. Wow. Well, Susan, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. Appreciate that account.
Thank you.
Keep listening.
For having me. I will.
Right. God bless.
Enjoy. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks.
Have a great night.
Interesting. And Joe, I do have. Let me just see here. Well, we don't have to get into it now. I do have a very good kind of an accounting of the lead up to 9/11 and why it's important, in terms of, look, I mean, it's not important to us in terms of social or religious significance, I don't believe. Maybe it has some cultural significance in terms of when Christ was born. In the working or in the social and aspect of things. But to the perverse, to the people who are profane, to the Illuminists, to the Satanists, to the cultists, it has a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose. And it's, again, belief is a driver of action. And this, if they believe, and if it is true, and they believe this to be the birth of Christ, of course they're going to want to make it as profane as possible. But 9/11, 2001 opened up the gates. And this is, to me, relevant to what Tom Horn talked about on Wednesday and Steve Quayle. It opened up the gates to something very sinister. It really did. And to a lesser extent, Dan Duvall might have mentioned it too yesterday a little bit. But really, Tom Horn and Steve Quayle really drove that point, or drove the system. They really explained it well.
You mentioned Steve Quayle was going to be on Coast to Coast. What day was that again?
Saturday. Steve Quayle is going to be on Coast to Coast AM Saturday, right? Yeah. And it's going to be very interesting. He's going to be talking a lot about the I think it's going to be about the economy, and I'm not sure who the host is going to be, but definitely if you have a chance, tune in to Steve Quayle on Coast to Coast AM. Always a very interesting. It's also always very interesting when he gets on there.
All right, let's go back to the phones. We're going to go to area code 918. 918, we're coming to you now. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. 918. All right. 512. 512, we're coming to you now. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hello?
Hey.
Good evening.
Hello? Hi. Well, I just wanted to maybe walk through with you guys how I found you. And I think...
Didn't know we were lost. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, sir.
I kind of went through some experiences with health matters, and then kind of wildly ended up in with some being recruited for some government matters, and I started having some dreams, and all of this is after I'd that, hey, you know, I'm giving this all up for you, and getting to the point of, you know, just a brokenness state of mind. And I was going through all of this, and I kind of backtracked about that part, but I was going through all of this, and there's a certain point I was like, why are you showing me this? Why? I don't understand. And, you know, I opened up the Bible that just right after I just got off my knees and was praying that part, and I opened it up to Ezekiel 33, and and I was really keeping a lot of this stuff to myself and not really being very vocal, and it's the part about where, you know, God tells Ezekiel to, you know, you have to, the blood will be on your,
absolutely. Yep. Ezekiel, that passage in Ezekiel, it makes me sit up and take notice. It puts me personally on a position where if I don't serve properly, if I'm disobedient, then yeah, I'm gonna get a whooping, a spiritual whooping. Does that make sense? But I understand that.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, you know, because I was really, there was more to that prayer. It was like, why are you showing this? Who am I? What am I? What do you want from me to do? And it was like, basically the response I got was, you're a watchman. And then I sat down, and once I kind of took some of that in, and over the next day or so, I was like, well, who else is a watchman? And I started Googling, and I started finding, one of the first hits was you guys, and I've really expanded my knowledge base and how to relook at things and examine things, to be able to talk to people about, you know, what's coming and how to get ready. Most people don't listen, or they're afraid to. But,
well, welcome to the party. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. When was this? How long ago was this?
It was I'd say about this time last year.
Okay, all right.
And
you mentioned something about health. You mentioned something about health issues and government issues.
Oh yeah, it's a long ride. It's a very long story.
Okay.
And, I've got some agreements out there that would land me some, you know, in some hot water if I started getting into that part. But
I understand.
It helped me wake up to the fact of how big of how much we're being deceived. You can see that. And so all that process was going on way before, you know, last year. I just didn't find you guys till about this time last year, and so I just wanted to say I appreciate what you do. And I've somewhere along the way kind of was thinking that, you know, at some point, you know, there's a lot of, you know, I listen and I hear a lot of frustration, the watchmen, the people that don't listen, and what the way I see it is, there was a guy that called in maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago and is talking about his frustrations. But I think that I kind of look at it as, hey, I engage their free will. I can tell them how it is, and if they want to look, great, I'll help them. If not, then I got to keep going. And if there's some way that we can maybe try to put together a, you know, just 2-page little flyer that we can download the people that are here, that can maybe hand to people to say, hey, you know, here, look, go check for yourself. And it's not some type of propaganda thing, but to maybe get Steve Quell or you know, Tom Horn or you guys to just, you know, add, you know,
interesting.
A small 5-bullet point.
Yeah. We actually, I've been working on something very similar to that. We had, I'm working on something like a tract that will grab the attention of people for the purposes of awakening them to the greater, well, to the lie, the extent of the lie. And the hardest part about that is to break it down into those bullet points and to condense it, where you got to walk a very thin line. I mean, or very thin line. You don't want to. I mean, the first words must grab their attention. It can't be hype, but it can't be watered down. Yeah, I get all that. So interesting.
I don't know if I've gotten sometimes I have dreams that I just don't remember until it happens. Sometimes I have it and I remember it and I write it down. But I think this has come of it with the Watchman on the Windshield, where we had a form like that and took the whole, people were able to download it and just go out and, while church is in service, go out and drop it on their windshield. And, if they throw it away, I mean, that's their free will. And you've engaged it. And how right. And if maybe, it's people doing it on their own, but they can at least have some way to reach these people and say, hey, don't throw this away. Just check it out. Do some research. And
very interesting. Very interesting that you would call with that, because it does confirm to me that what we're working on here is necessary. So I'm glad you did that. I'm glad that, and someday I'd like to hear your tale of how you got from point A to point present. Sounds pretty interesting.
It's kind of a wild one, but I sometimes I probably maybe need to talk offline about it a little bit, and then
sure. Well, buddy, I'll tell you what, we have reached the end of our program. Sorry to cut you loose so short, but I want to thank you for your call, and especially thank you for that, the idea and confirmation of what we're working on here as well. But and thanks for your letting us know how you found us. And the Watchman aspect, very important. But we got to cut you loose, buddy. We're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right, man.
Wow. Thank you. Have a good night.
I don't know about you, Joe, but tonight seemed to go very quickly from the first word to the last word, to the callers, Constance, God bless you, and to the last caller, God bless you as well, and every caller in between. Wow. What a fantastic, it was a fantastic week. Now, Monday, don't forget, Pastor David Langford and Steve Quayle again. Steve doing a marathon session of radio, but Pastor Langford, I'm looking forward to that. Folks, if you haven't done so already, please go to HagmannandHagmann.com, click on the special announcement on the right-hand side. Let Pastor Langford know. Please let him know that you're involved, or that you support his fast, prayer, repentance endeavor this month, because we haven't talked about that as much as we should. Go to HagmannandHagmann.com, special announcement on the right-hand side, click on that box. It'll take you to exactly what's going on, and then just drop Pastor Langford just a one-sentence line saying, we're with you, Pastor, and just mention that you heard it from Hagmann and Hagmann. The reason being, again, in the run-up to Monday's program, he understands that we're all supporting him in both actions, deed, and word of mouth. With that, God bless.
With that, we're out of time. Have a great weekend. Till Monday, stay safe. God bless.